and an or. In Spanish, we have sounds that will dictate how we say and or. So the word o, or, changes to u before any word that starts with an o or an ho, because remember, la h is muda, it's silent, so it doesn't make a sound. So the starting sound of the following word, if it is o, then if you're going to start saying or something else that starts with the sound o, then you have to change the o to an u. The same thing happens with the word e, and the word e changes to e before the sounds e or e, starting sound words to avoid repeating the same vowel sound. Let's see the examples. No sé si el perro tiene 7 u 8 años, because if you notice, ocho starts with the sound o, and so we have to change or to u in Spanish so that you're not repeating the same sounds and it doesn't blend it together. So, no sé si el perro tiene 7 u 8 años should translate to, I don't know if the dog is 7 or 8 years old. The other example with and. Pero todavía es alegre e inteligente. Should read, but he is still happy and intelligent. So notice that we have to change the Y to an E. Instead of saying y inteligente, we need to change it to e inteligente again so that the sounds don't blend together. That's pretty much for that section. It just takes practice. So let's finish up here with comparaciones de igualdad. To compare things that are the same or equal, we use the structure tan plus whatever adjective or adverb you're using to compare, and como. In English, it's the equivalent of as, adjective or adverb, as. For example, Miguel es tan alto como tu hermano. Translates to, Miguel is as tall as your brother. Pedro corre tan rápidamente como David. Should translate as, Pedro runs as fast as David. So notice altos being your adjective, rápidamente an adverb. So again, you'd still use the same structure for comparing things of equality. Now, when you want to compare less or more, to compare two verbs' actions, we use más or menos que or tanto como, again, if it's equal. In English, it translates to more or less than or as much as. For example, we use the sample with trabajas. Trabajas más que yo. So the first arrow should read, you work more than I do, or more than me if you wrote. The middle arrow, trabajas menos que yo, should translate to, you work less than me, or less than I. The last arrow, trabajas tanto como yo, would then be your equality. You work as much as I. As much as I do. To use nouns in equal comparisons, we use, because again, we can also compare nouns, the structure tanto or tanta or tantos or tantas, because again, this word functions as an adjective because we're describing nouns. So tanto, noun, como, and then whatever you're comparing. So it's equivalent to in English as much as or as many as, because tanto again is an adjective. It agrees with the noun. It follows it in number and gender. So let's see how that works. Tenemos tanto trabajo como ustedes. It should read, we have as much work as you guys. Tanto matches trabajo because trabajo is masculine singular. The next sample, hay tantos chicos como chicas, should translate to, there are as many boys as girls. Tantos ends in os because chicos is masculine plural. The next sample, tengo tantas clases como tú, should read, I have as many classes as you. Tantas is feminine plural ending because clases is a feminine and plural noun. We can also use más and menos with nouns. For example, tengo más trabajo que mi hermana. Should translate to, I have more work than my sister. Sergio tiene menos dinero que Verónica. Should translate to, Sergio has less money than Veronica. So again, they don't always have to be equal, but you can also, again, more or less. So let's go on to the progresivo, the progressive. Okay, so we've talked about this before. This is not actually new. The present progressive is formed by combining the verb to be, that's typically the verb that we use most often with it, with the present participle or the ing ending, as in English, ending form of the verb. So remember, to form the present participle of a regular AR verb, you add ando to the stem of the verb. For example, trabajar. You take the stem, trabaj, and then you add ando, trabajando. How does that work? Let's look at the ER and IR endings. Same idea. You take the stem, such as in comer and asistir, and you change it to yendo at the end. That's how you would conjugate. So comer would change to comiendo, asistir to asistiendo. So let's look how it works. I am studying, present progressive because we are doing it now. Estoy estudiando. I am eating, estoy comiendo. So the present progressive is using the present tense of estoy and the progressive ending of the verb you want to put into action. Now, you can also have the verb estar in your past tenses that you have since learned. You can say, yo estuve estudiando. I was studying in the preterite. Yo estuve estudiando ayer. I was studying last night or yesterday. I can also say, yo estaba estudiando muchas horas. I used to be, or I was studying many hours. So you can use the imperfect or the preterite. Remember, the difference is whether you're going to give it an actual beginning and time frame, like I said, ayer, yesterday, estuve, using estar in the preterite. It is irregular in the preterite. Or I can have said, just like I said, estaba estudiando, where I studied many hours, or I was studying many hours. I just didn't say when I was studying many hours. It could have been last year or last month or even last night. It's not a specific time in the past. We just know it already happened. That would be using the imperfect. So let's look at some other examples using the present progressive because the present tense of estar is our easiest form so far. I am talking with Maria should translate to Estoy hablando con Maria. You are living in California should translate to Tú estás viviendo en California. Only use the present progressive for actions that are in progress. Compare the uses of the present indicative, which is the form we used or learned in Español Uno, with the uses of the present progressive. So there is a difference, and it's the same in English. There is a difference in English as well. The present indicative, estudio español, would be equivalent to the English, I study Spanish. Or these days, as in this year, I am studying Spanish. Because you're taking Spanish class, this year you study Spanish. That's the indicative. I do study Spanish is another way to also translate the present indicative. Whereas if we look at the present progressive, estoy estudiando español, then that means right now at this moment, I am studying Spanish. So right now that you're going over notes, estás estudiando español. But if you're talking about in general, este año escolar, this school year, estudias español. That would be your present indicative. So those are the difference between those two present tenses.